Hello, Rasko. Hello, Mike.
Hello, guys. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Roscoe. Hi, Caio.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for allowing me for this honor to give a mentoring session.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely.
So, for how long have you been a developer?
For 15 years,
Wow. In
and
iOS?
I'm not a professional developer. I'm in transition. I'm currently educating myself to because I want to become a productive member of our iOS team.
Right. So, mostly your experience is in Java.
Java, yes, Java backend services. Some of the UI, like Java FX, but that's not too much extensive. Let's just stick to the Java and backends.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So, the topic today is architecting for ads-free subscriptions. Can you explain a little bit the challenge you have right now?
Well, yes, of course. The thing is that as I already explained, I'm not a professional developer, and I needed a guided education on how to approach such topic, which under the hoods appears as the global state management, dynamic global state management, because that's something what depends on whether I have subscribed to a particular application or not. If I have paid subscription, which is of course probably professional developers are probably familiar quite extensively about it, but I'm really not that much, and I wanted to have to hear a sane approach. So to not to as you have a point, because we really don't want to have everywhere around if else, regardless if it is some API module or it is a main module, it's a UI, etc. That's basically it.
Right. So, usually when you have like this paid and free version, when you pay, let's say you remove the ads from the application. So, does you need to update everywhere you show ads, right?
Yes, maybe even add some extra feature and make it visible in the UI. But essentially, exactly what you have said.
Yeah, it's not just about ads, but any kind of dynamic UI updates based on any kind of state transition or anything like that, right?
Yes, you can actually nail it down to such approach. Yes.
Yeah, because usually the approach you see, the common approach is to have a shared state, some kind of singleton that you
Yeah.
access everywhere, and there's if else everywhere. If is paid customer layout somehow, and if
Yeah.
there's a change, a notification is sent, then the whole UI updates itself. The problem with this approach is that you have if else everywhere, so your components start getting these responsibilities everywhere. It's hard to develop, it's hard to maintain, it's hard to test because everything is coupled with this
Yes.
state.
Tightly coupled. Yes. Tightly coupled.
Yeah. So we're not going to look at this approach. We're not going to use. We're not going to look at if else everywhere. We're going to find solutions without if else everywhere. Now, if you have a composition root in your application, that could be easy to do because you can completely recompose your app. So let's look at different approaches. Approaches number one, let's think about recomposing the app when the subscription state changes. One approach. Let's think if we have here some kind of free UI. It's just a view controller. Here is not to think about UI or how to create a UI. That's outside the scope of this session. You have a view controller, the background color is yellow if it's free, and the background will be red or green if it's paid. Okay. UI navigation controller, in a navigation controller here. We start with the free UI. The app. So we have an app with the free UI, which is yellow. Let's say that there's be some event that will trigger you to recompose your application for a paid customer, which can have much more features or can have remove the ads from it and so on. So these events can be triggered by an event change. It could be a notification, it could be anything. Here, let's create just a button event, a button tap event. So a bar button item, title, start subscription. I need an image, an action. So this is the action here. This is the event. But it could be anything. It could be a change in state. It could be a notification, a change, a push notification that you receive, whatever. There's been an action that needs to change the layout.
Something happens.
Exactly.
Yes, something happens. Let's capture self here. Then you can recompose the application. For example, we set the root view controller, be a new navigation controller with the paid UI, for example. So you recompose the whole application when there's an event.
So self.
And I hope you will agree that you look in 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, you come up with something that you're not even visually appealing, right?
Sorry?
Just in this couple of minutes, like you start typing like a couple of minutes ago, and still you have a feeling something is not right, and it's too much effort. You can already assume later it will be hard to change it, right?
Well, it depends. Depends how it's going to be built. It doesn't need to be hard to change, right? It doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we don't need a view controller anymore. Let's just make free UI. So we start with a free UI, and when there's an event, we just recompose the UI. For example, start subscription, boom, now you have the paid UI.
Okay.
You can even toggle by sending it back to cancel subscription. It should go back to free UI. As you can see, we have no if statements. You can toggle the subscription and completely recompose your application with a different UI. Make sense?
Yes.
So this is one way you can do it. So when there's an event that triggers this subscription change, you can completely recompose the UI by just setting a new window root view controller.
Yes, you replace the whole view controller with a.
Yeah, so this is one approach. If the UI is so different that it's completely like, you completely need to recompose it.
Yes, you have actually dedicated the whole section of code to one or the other, one or another variant. Yeah, okay.
And this way you have different compositions when you are in a state and when you are in another state. So you avoid if else everywhere. This is one approach. And then you avoid if else everywhere because a different composition that can be tested in isolation. You test the free composition and you test the paid composition, for example. So that's the idea. Like there's some event and you just recompose the application. This can be done from the composition root.
Yeah.
So, for example, the free UI doesn't need to know about the paid UI. The paid UI doesn't need to know about the free UI. You can develop them in isolation, and there won't be any if else statement anywhere. Right? So this is approach one. When you can recompose, because like the UI is so different when it's paid that there are so many more features that it doesn't even make sense to try to make it dynamic. So this is approach one.
Okay.
Now another approach we can have is to, instead of having if else inside each UI, inside each component, is to create a container UI, container view controller that will compose, for example, the paid UI and the free UI. So you may have some UI that has some ads on the top, or on the bottom here is going to show some ads here. So the container will have the ads container view and the content view, for example. And we'll compose the two. So here is just the content, doesn't know anything about ads. And the ads doesn't know anything about the content. Every time there's a change in the ads state or the subscription state, the container will just relay out itself. This way, all the if else stays in one single place in the container only. So the logic stays only in the container instead of moving if else everywhere. The container will manage the state, and when there's a state change, it will update its children. That's another approach. So this way you can adapt dynamically without recomposing everything.
Okay.
Every time there's a change in state, the container will decide. And you can do the same with Swift UI views. Even if you're not using UI view controllers, you can have a container Swift UI view. They will compose and control two different states for each view. So for example, the container Swift UI view, if it's paid, you will hide the ads view. There will be only one if. The if statement will be only in the container. It will not propagate into the children.
Yeah, and in case, I don't know, because you mentioned that you're transitioning, if you're not familiar with the container APIs, the container view APIs, there's solid documentation on Apple's website, so make sure to check that out. It's very straightforward and extremely powerful.
The UI view controller container APIs.
Yeah.
And in Swift UI, it's just a view with a toggle. For example, every time there is a state change, you will relay out the.
Okay, one can contain others and vice versa.
Yeah.
So this approach works with both Swift UI and UI view controller. The same thing we're doing here, changing the whole root of your application, also works with Swift UI.
Okay.
You can completely change the composition at the top level. At the top level, when there's a change in state, you change the whole composition. Or you can create containers, and then down the tree, you can change specific parts as well. And the state management stays in the container, so the children doesn't need to know about that and don't need to have if else everywhere. So that's approach number 2, containers, either in Swift UI or UI view controllers. Sometimes you have some very dynamic UI. When you start subscription and you change the subscription state or any kind of state that changes, you need to relay out the UI, but you want it to do it with animations. You don't want to lose the current state and recompose the whole application. In this case, I recommend creating dynamic UI with UI table view or collection view. You can use composite data sources to avoid if else everywhere. That's good. This approach number 3, dynamic UI using data source composites. For example, let's say we have a table view data source, or let's say we have an ads data source.
Okay.
You're familiar with UI table view?
Yes.
Let's say it's a data source. We need to implement some methods here. Cell for row. Let's create a cell. Table view .dq. What's table view? DQ cell for identify. Let's say add cell.
I see. So actually advocating for the style which will appear or not appear depending on
Depending on
the source. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I wouldn't.
So let's say text label text equals this is an ad.
Yeah, cool. I actually see where are you leading to.
So you can have a data source specifically for ads, and then you have another data source for the content, for example.
Yeah. And the other stuff will not contain the other. Or we will not there at all.
Them.
Yeah. Cool, interesting approach. I must admit.
So this is content. Let's say index path. We have a content ads data source that manages the ad state, And then we have a content data source that manages just the content. And they are decoupled from each other. So we can develop these two features independently. But when you show in the screen, you want to show the ads on the top, let's say, and the content after below it.
Excellent.
We can create a table view data source composite, which also implements the data source. So it needs to be an NS object.
Yeah, I see what you're reading too. Actually, you made it dependency injectable, context injectable, depending on whether it is one or the other. Yeah.
Need with the data sources.
Yeah, it's interesting. It enables you to test it out without any kind of UI.
Yes.
Exactly.
You can compose it as well.
Yeah.
So we need to calculate the number of sections, for example. Just reduce.
You have delayed the UI to some later moment when you actually want to dig with the UI layout. Yeah, cool.
So the number of sections is the number of sections in every data source. So we just compose all of them. So data source, the number of sections in table view. Whoops, table view. Or I don't know, 1. So here you need to make an implementation that makes sense for a composite, right? And because each data source can have multiple sections, so you need to calculate.
No, it's okay. I'm aware of it. So that's okay.
Yeah. So here, cell for row as well can have like data source for section, let's say, in table view. Great, it's just a simple implementation here, because you don't want to make a lot of for loops inside these data sources to be performant, but I'm not going to do it with caching, because the idea here is not about performance. We're talking about the design, implementation details. You can do it later. Let's say we have a table view, and we need to decide what is the data source for a specific section.
Not to optimize prematurely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's start. Okay, the section count will start as 0, and we go for each data source in data sources. And we decide the section count will be plus the data source number, data source number of sections in table view, or 1, if it's not implemented. And if the section is less than the section count, it means that this data source manages that section. So then we can return data source. Otherwise, there's been an error, let's say fatal error. For demo purposes, data source not found for section. Something like this. Of course, this is not performant at all, but you can probably perform some kind of caching to speed up. All right, now we can get a data source for a specific index path section in a table view and delegate a message cell for row path. This is how you can create a composite of data sources. Okay. What else? Good enough? Any other method we need to implement? Number of rows. So here it's data source for that section, number of rows in section. Right, now we have a composite of data sources. Oh, this is just a section. We can develop the features in isolation without if statements.
Yeah. Very interesting about it. So actually, you have set the data source to drive your state.
Here we have a UI table view controller. we need to set the data source, the table view, to be the composite, table composite. And the data sources is an array, and we can have a head data source and a content data source, for example. The problem here is that this is a weak reference.
Right.
So someone needs to hold the reference. Oh, we even get a warning here. Instance will be immediately deallocated because the property data source is weak. Thank you, Xcode. Let's hold it in a variable here for demo purposes. Data source. Let's see if it works. Ooh, look at that. So we have an ad. Let's change the color here. And this is the content one. You see, we're composing. We implemented the data sources separately, but when you show in the UI, they show together. And we can do all kinds of things now. We can just add another ads data source if you wanted it at the top and bottom. Look at that.
Cool.
All without if statements anywhere. Now let's say you want to change the state of the ads data source when there is an event change, right? So lazy var ads data source. You want to change the state. Let's say toggle in table view. Your ads data source now can have a method toggle in table view. Why table view? You can have some state here, some private var is showing ads. True. You can toggle it here. And you update the table view, reload data, for example.
Now you can add that to the bottom too.
Yeah, and let's say if you're showing ads, you have one row, otherwise you have 0. So table view, this is vc dot table view. So also with 5 vc here. Capture the data source. Look at that, can toggle now. So let's say toggle subscription. So any kind of event can change the state of the one data source directly without affecting others. So we don't need if statements everywhere.
Yeah, pretty neat.
You can do something like this, or you can have different data sources and only change the state of one without affecting the other. Either share the same instance or have an ads data source too. And you can change them independently. So you can toggle one without toggling the other, or toggle both at the same time.
Yeah, great. Very interesting.
You have this very dynamic UI that can update on the fly for any state change without if else everywhere.
Yeah.
Which was the goal.
That's the prerequisite here, Everything should be contained.
I really have a feeling this will be an eye-opening session, at least for me. I think. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Fantastic.
That's the idea.
No, I'm honest. I really understand that probably for any professional developer or iOS, it could be, for me, it's really eye-opening. I wouldn't consider so for now. Maybe at some time I would just simply get to it, but it's really interesting. So.
Yeah, you can create your whole UI out of these decomposed data sources that can be managing its own state without affecting each other, and you compose them. It works the same with collection view as well if you want a different layout, because table view is just the section and rows, but like Selection view can be much more customized than that. You can have like horizontal scrolling, vertical scrolling, and so on.
Yeah, I like the way you have, as you also as you mentioned very frequently, you separate the concerns to proper place.
Yeah, you can test this in isolation. Very simple, right? To test this class. Very simple to test this class as well. And the composite you test only once,
Yeah.
and it should work for any class that implements data source, for example.
Yeah. Very cool.
So I think those are 3 ways you can consider depending on your UI, and depending on your requirements. You either recompose the app and use a container for managing state, protect or hide details from the children, or dynamic UI with composites. Those are 3 good ways of dealing with this problem. Make sense?
Yes, excellent. I already said it. For me, it is very, enlightening in this regard. So,
Awesome.
thank you,
Do you
guys.
have any questions about any of these approaches?
Okay, maybe depending on application size, for example, maybe for a small prototype or a big production application, how would you recommend considering one, two, three, or I mean one or another, for example, for a small app, maybe first approach, for a big maybe variant of a second. What would you recommend?
I think the simplest one is the container. So for a small application, you probably will start with a container view. But if this application grows too much and you need to manage the state changing in multiple places, you will start having many containers with many if-else statements in the containers. Right?
Yeah, yes.
Thus, I would go to the recomposing the app when the subscription changes and completely recompose the app. And it's not just for subscription changes, but like if the user is logged in or not, maybe you change the whole
any event,
application. Or you have applications that manage multiple accounts. For example, Instagram, you can log in with 10 accounts and switch between one account and the other. So you recompose the UI for each account, and they are all living its own heap, space in memory, so they don't affect each other. But I would only go with the dynamic UI composites if I need to have these UI changes on the fly with animations, because this is more complex to manage.
Okay.
So order of simplicity to more complexity, 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, that. So actually, the more gymnastics the UI is supposed to do, then you probably want to consider one or the other.
Yeah, because usually you have a delegate as well, right? The delegate protocol, and you want these methods implemented. So yeah, this is just a simple demo here, but this is going to grow.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, you can also delegate here and compose the two. So it's a class that implements both, and you can pass delegate messages as well. But recomposing the app is simpler than doing these dynamic changes. And sometimes maybe the designer will want these dynamic changes, and this will increase the cost of development and it will take more time. Maybe you go back to the designer and say, we can develop the app much faster if we can recompose the whole application.
I see.
And let's say the user navigates like in the navigation controller, for example, 3 levels down, and you need to recompose the whole application. Doesn't mean you're going to bring them down back to point 1. You can still recompose the application exactly at the point where they are. Right? You can check at the state restoration APIs. Or if you have like a data-driven UI, you can reconstruct the UI for the new state. So wherever you are in the tree of the view hierarchy, you can recompose the whole application, but not losing the current state the user is in. Right? Because it's not going to be a great user experience if you change the root window and they go back 3 steps back and they need to tap again over and over to go back to where they were.
It would be actually it would nail down to user change the theme and you shut him off and send him back to the login screen just to change the theme, like I don't know, dark or light,
Yes.
for example.
Yeah, I've seen apps doing this, and it's horrible. It's a horrible user experience.
Okay.
So try to avoid it. So you can check the state restoration APIs. There is good documentation as well by Apple on how to restore a specific state into your application. With UIKit, preserving your app's UI across launches, for example, is the same idea. Preserving the state across launches is the same preserving the state across recomposition of your application, right? It's exactly the same idea. You have good documentation about it as well. In Swift UI, you almost get this for free if you drive your whole UI based on state. By changing that state, you can relay out your application just by changing the state, right? That's pretty much the idea. Like a data-driven, state-driven UI approach. So check these docs. Preserving your app's UI across launches. And you can use the same idea, but preserving your state UI across, I don't know, recomposition.
Yeah, cool. You will, as you usually do in your videos, I hope you will add that as a link, as a part of the description. So
yeah, I will.
Excellent, thank you.
Right. Any other questions?
No, this actually, thank you very much. It was really educational for me. So
awesome.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. I really got what I expected from this session. So
Awesome.
All right. And if you have any questions about implementation, when you start implementing it, let us know in the community.
Sure, I will definitely. Thank you guys so much.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.